and welcome to From the Balcony. My name is Ella Rhumes, and today we are joined with the Kansas Senate Majority Leader, Chase Blasi, and the Kansas House Minority Leader, Brandon Woodard, ahead of the upcoming legislative session in January. This episode will cover their journeys into public service, legislative priorities, what it's like stepping into leadership roles at a young age, the evolution of the political parties in Kansas, and how Kansas politics is evolving through a new generation of lawmakers. So Kansas is seeing younger legislators like yourselves step into leadership roles. What unique perspectives do you think young lawmakers bring to the table?
I remember back to 9/11 and truly watching the country unite around this scary thing that happened to us, right? And you fast forward to today and things feel very, very different and not united. I think the perspective young lawmakers bring to the State House, my first legislative session, I was on the Higher Education Budget Committee, and we were seeking a restoration of funding to higher education, both not just the four-year universities, but also technical and community colleges as well. And I had one of my colleagues who said, why would we invest in higher ed? Why can't they just mow lawns for the summer like I did and pay for their tuition? 1975 called. You can't do that. You can't afford that anymore. And so I think we are able to bring our lived experiences to the State House to let people know, hey, I pay $450 a month in student loan payments. I've paid back over $20,000 in student loans, and yet my balance has gone up, right? And so being able to tell them this system, the way that it isn't working. I think it also allows us to come together around issues that we all agree on. I'm very active in the Kansas Future Caucus, which is a group of legislators 45 and under. We, I think, get a lot of really great work done because outside of our committee work and outside of our debates on the floor, we do spend a lot of time together. There's not a ton to do in Topeka when it's snowy and super cold out. There's restaurants all around the Capitol complex. So if we do get a break, we'll go across the street and get coffee or a drink together or have dinner. And it allows a lot of that opportunity for us to engage and realize that these jobs are pretty tough. A lot of people are raising young kids. They have partners back home, and then, spending 3 months of the year away from your family takes a toll. And so being able to share those experiences together is very different than the folks who are able to do this and they're retired and are able to bring their spouse with them to Topeka and they can hang out for the weekend. It's a very demanding job, but I think all of that in sum is young people bring a lived experience that's different than a lot of the folks that have traditionally served in the legislature. And I think our colleagues have recognized our ability to come together, focus on the common good. And I think a point I always try to highlight too is more often than not, the issues that are covered in the press are the times where there's those social issues that, of course, there's these fierce debates on. Now, we don't talk as much about the fact that 80% of the bills that we pass are nearly unanimous. And so I think there's some statistic we would have to get from Future Caucus, but I believe that millennial legislators are something like 25% of legislators across the country, and yet they represent 40% of all the bipartisan legislation that's been signed into law. That's what young people are able to do when we step up and step into leadership roles in our state houses.
To Minority Leader Woodard's point, kind of ties into my next question. So with, older members of the legislature, like we call them more seasoned, more experienced members of the legislature, how did you navigate earning trust and credibility from members who have been around, in the legislature for almost decades or a few years?
Yeah, I think if you do your homework and show up prepared for committee and ask good questions, at first there's some of those folks that have been around for a while. They're like, who's this youngster, right? I was told by one of my colleagues my first session to sit down, shut up, and learn the process. I committed to learning the process, but I said, unlike you, I actually had to win a primary and a general election to get here. So I'm not going to sit down. I'm not going to shut up. Fast forward to this leadership role. I ran for minority leader 2 years ago. I lost by 1 vote. And a lot of that vote did kind of come down to a breakdown between generations. Fast forward to 2024, They watched me step up into a policy committee as a ranking for a committee on the elections that I had never served on. And yet I was able to work with our chair and the other side of the aisle in really standing up for what the House position was. I went and met with each of the members on the committee and realized that unlike the folks that were doing election bills on the Senate side, the majority of folks in the House Committee on Elections had served as election workers. That opened the door to have a lot of conversations about what sort of policy changes were good and what was maybe like, this isn't really right for us or right for Kansas. And so doing that, serving in leadership in previous terms in the House, I think really it was just coming down to meeting with the folks that I serve with, hearing what issues are important to them, keeping them posted. If they're like, oh, well, this community college in my district is really important to me, going to them and updating them whenever we pass something out of higher education budget. I think when it comes to leadership itself, people were looking in our caucus for someone that could unite all 37 of us. I don't envy I would love to be in the majority, but, the majority leader in the Senate or the House has 88 members he has to manage, right? In the House Democratic caucus, we have 37. And so it is some of the most progressive members and some of the most conservative fiscal hawks in our caucus. And they were looking for someone who could bring every end of the spectrum of the Democratic caucus together. And I was really honored to win overwhelmingly and be elected leader last December.
Took a little different approach just because I was on staff and being a member. And so a lot of folks got to know me in that capacity. And at the time, I came in the staff role, I was mid-20s, early 20s. And so to many members of the legislature, especially in the Senate, I was considered a grandson to them. And so it came on relationships. You get to know each other personally. You get asked, get married, how's your meetings? And, you had a kid. You get some, so for them, you kids doing it, another one. So, what's it really like? And so for him in relationships, you really know each other, understand each other's. And I think with anything, it's just how we really bridges these relationships and talking to each other. And so that's my approach was a little different than Brandon's spot to get here and how to come in the culture. I came as a stand relationships and help serve these people needs, members. So it's a little different, but it came down to relationships and getting to know them personally and understand each other and these perspectives.
Something a little more on the fun side. What is something each of you are proud to have accomplished so far in your legislature in your legislative time? And this can be something really big or really small.
So two of my kids are adopted, and one of the first bills I worked on was adoption legislation to make it easier to adopt. It is incredibly unaffordable, especially for, we hear all the time, couples come to us, my wife and I say, hey, how did you adopt? What was your experience? And every time we get to the cost of private adoption, it's just people's eyes glaze over. It's so much money. It's true, some serious financial sacrifice. And so I want to make it easier and affordable, especially when we have couples come to us and they're both teachers. There's no way two teachers on teacher salary could afford to adopt a child in America based on cost. And so we made it a lot easier by increasing the tax credit for Kansas families and made it just a little simpler with the process. And so Kansas is a good place to adopt compared to other states. It's quick and painless for the most part, but it always comes down to cost for many families. And honestly, I think it's going to take an act of Congress to truly make it affordable nationwide and to get behind, to wrap some of these challenges around, because a lot of the money goes to adoption agencies and attorneys. But really, it's these adoption agencies that say, hey, I'm not going to place a child in your care and tell you where the child's at that needs a loving parent unless you pay this $16,000, you got to wire it to us. And it just seems crazy. You're like, well, I have to go to the bank and wire money to this group just to, So it's just, that's something I'm really proud about, to ensure that there's so many kids that are unwanted and need a loving family. And so this legislation makes it easier for Kansans to adopt.
I love doing things like this because I love hearing stories of the people that we serve with. So that's really awesome. Being in the super minority, it depends on the year, it depends on the mood of the speaker. There are some times that if the name from a bill is from a Democrat, it's not going anywhere. Other times it is, hey, work with this one or two Republicans to get this done. So I have a couple examples. I think one, something as small as the governor's budget a couple of years ago included getting rid of the DMV modernization fee. It was a small but very tiny tax that every single person paid when they registered their vehicle, or maybe they renewed their driver's license. And we had a bill introduced to do it. We were going through the appropriations process. And then I was just like, actually, I want to make sure this actually happens. I went over to at the time, the transportation chair and said, hey, can you run this amendment on this bill? And he was like, well, why don't you do it? And I was like, I want it to pass. So he did it. And so at the end of the day, do I get credit? No. Does that matter? No. We saved Kansans money, right? The other example, I think, we had a situation in Olathe a few years ago where a student was being stalked by a teacher. The student didn't know that they were being stalked. One of the other students told them, like, hey, that teacher's taking photos of you. And we later found out that there were over 200 different images of this student. But because of a loophole in the law, the only thing that he could be charged with was reckless stalking. And because the person didn't know they were being stalked, it didn't elevate the crime. And so I met with the family. I met with it was in 2020. So I actually met with my opponent at the time because we were like, one of us is going to serve in the legislature next year and be able to work on this. And so Laura and I met with the family. We met with the district attorney. We met with law enforcement and basically said, hey, let's make sure that this never happens again. We can't do anything about this case, but let's make sure this never happens again. And I did win that election, but Laura still worked with us on that legislation, worked with the family, and ultimately we passed a bill that not only the entire Olathe delegation signed on to, including me, which made it bipartisan, but we got the speaker and the majority leader and the speaker pro tem to sign on the bill. Leadership almost never puts their name on legislation, but we were able to get that bill passed 125-0 in the House, 40-0 in the Senate, and the governor signed it the day it was on her desk. And that was really, I think, it's a testament for what can happen when you're not taking credit and you're willing to work with anyone to solve a problem.
Yeah, those are both great answers and great examples of bipartisan legislation and things that I think everyday Kansans really wouldn't think about, but that's like in the nitty gritty of your job, which I love. So moving right along to a question about bipartisanship, Senator Dole was a big proponent of bipartisanship. How does bipartisanship look differently in Kansas than it does on a federal level? And how does it look within what many consider to be a veto-proof supermajority? Yeah,
I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, but so much of the work we do is bipartisan. And you mentioned Bob Dole, and I think it was really fascinating because I was with one of my Republican colleagues, Representative Nick Hoheisel from Wichita, a few years ago, accepting the Caucus of the Year award for the Future Caucus. We were the inaugural caucus that was awarded in honor of one of the former leaders that passed away unexpectedly. But we happened to be in D.C. accepting the award the same week as Bob Dole's funeral in D.C. And because of the national coverage we got about bipartisanship in Kansas, a couple of the folks on Bob Dole's advance team were like, hey, we have a Republican and a Democratic lawmaker here from Kansas talking about bipartisanship. Clearly, it's still alive in Kansas. And we were able to actually attend the funeral. We sat right behind Tom Hanks and Savannah Guthrie, who were hosting the event. It was wild. People are like, is that the back of your head on CNN? But no, I think it's still alive and well. And while, yes, we are in the super minority, it'd be very easy. And some of my colleagues do this. It'd be very easy as Democrats to show up, vote no, scream and shout about what's happening and go home. But, I tell folks in our caucus, it's not that hard to go find 26 other members that will vote with you. It takes time. You have to invest time in building relationships. But at the end of the day, if they trust your opinion on one issue that you care a lot about, they will work with you on it. And I think, podcasts like this or the event we did at the Dole Institute with Laura Williams, I think those are really important to highlight the true work that is happening. Of course, there's the battles and the fierce debates, but more often than not, stuff that's not covered, the parts that people don't see, is the real bipartisan work that we're doing behind the scenes.
No, honestly, going back to what Brandon was saying earlier about relationships, that's what matters, because over time, trust is built, and that is how you build a strong relationship to work together on policy. The minority leader of the Senate, Dinah Sykes from Lenexa, and I are close. We communicate very regularly, and we have a great relationship. We don't always agree, but as was alluded to earlier, I'd say over 90% of the bills in the Kansas Senate are passed on a bipartisan vote. And sometimes that gets lost in the noise, especially in the media, where it doesn't tell a good story when everybody gets along and tries to solve problems, right? And so, I would say, so for us, we have a personal relationship and then a professional relationship. And so just to kind of always keep the ice broken, we participate in fun activities like we're in a fantasy football league together. We have March Madness competitions with our office staff and offices. And so, we're always trying to keep it, human, because we are all human and we have different perspectives on some policy, but we are all human who want what's best for Kansas. And so as long as we remember that, I think together we can do great things. And so on policy, in the State House, the minority leader and I have worked on various policies, particularly around children. So we worked on child care together, child care regulations and rules to ensure that we can create access. We worked on, we introduced together last year, creating a Kansas State child tax credit, which we do not have. And then this year we're working on some policy together, one being cell phones in K-12 public schools. We just firmly believe that the health of our youngest Kansans is so critical that it's paramount that we work together to work to solve problems. And so that's where we work together on policy. But there are countless other, I can sit here all day and name legislators in the Kansas Senate who work together across the aisle on policy that's important to them. And so it happens every day. So anyone who has doubt or losing hope that the American spirit is not strong, I just would say, come look at the Kansas legislature, or at least in the Senate. I mean, it happens every day. So I think the future is bright.
Yeah, thank you both for those answers. I am a huge proponent of the Kansas legislature and the bipartisanship that happens there. I always say you never know who you're going to run into in an elevator. You can have the most progressive Democrat and, the most conservative Republican in there, and you guys get talking about how slow the elevator is going up and down,
Chiefs.
And the Chiefs, we're all Chiefs fans. Yes. I always say that, I think here at KU, we get really, really heated about the K-State rivalry. And then I say, but we're all Chiefs fans. So, but yeah, and part of my question is about the federal level, and I've interned for consulting firms, for lobbying firms in both the state house and at the federal level, and I think that it really is that at the federal level everybody has staffs, so they're all walking around in their little bubble, and you can't really talk to them. And in Kansas, members have lunch together. And it's you can't just be mean. It is really about creating those relationships, because you never know who you're going to be sitting next to the next day. So yeah, great answers. Getting into a little bit more about your respective political parties and how they are evolving, especially in Kansas. I know we've heard a lot that Kansas is kind of the predictor, things happen in Kansas before they happen anywhere else. And I think that makes our state really unique. When we were starting this podcast, we were trying to talk about things that would make people outside of Kansas kind of interested in Kansas, because I know we're always called a flyover state. And I know our mission is to try to dispel some of that. So over time, both political parties have evolved with a huge shift within the last 10 years. And how has this affected Kansas? How has this affected your inner workings? And as leaders within your respective parties, where do you see the parties moving forward?
Well, Kansas politics has changed a ton in the last decade, and I think largely is driven by President Trump. Obviously, we have seen a huge swing in the Johnson County, northeast part of our state, a more left-leaning trend among voters, whereas rural areas have become more conservative and more right-leaning trends. So politics are changing. Demographics in terms of groups are changing. Kansas is a rural state, but it isn't as rural as it once was. As the metropolitan areas in Wichita and the Northeast, Johnson County area continue to grow, that is where just the votes are coming from that shape Kansas lawmakers' policy, and especially with redistricting every 10 years as the maps are being drawn, Johnson County gains a new Senate seat and 3 or 4 House seats. And so the power is shifting to the more urban areas just based on numbers, one person, one vote. And so in Kansas politics, the Republican Party, Trump, obviously, right across the whole nation, is a dominant voice in the policy conversations of our party. But in Central County, more blue collar votes who have traditionally been more Democratic have come our way. And so we have districts that were harder for us to have and keep in the past have become more solidified because blue collar voters are turning to go our way. Whereas you're seeing the opposite in Johnson County, where more affluent college degree voters are going the other direction. So I'm sure Brandon can talk a lot more about that since it's his neck of the woods, but the party demographics are certainly shifting in the state. And a lot of criticisms I hear in my party is, how is it that the governor was elected by winning only 6 counties or however many counties it was? I can't remember exactly, but there's 105 counties and yet she only won 6. So how does she win that? Well, it goes back to basic math. Once again, one person, one vote. Those counties that she won all are the largest counties in our state where the population primarily resides. And collectively, they gave her a plurality to win the vote. So it's a demographic change as well as just where the people are. So that's why I think that's how Kansas politics are being shaped today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Representative Adam Smith, our tax chair, a couple of years ago put out a map that instead of it looking just like the actual geographic, makeup of Kansas, it actually changed the size of each district based on how much geographical land they cover. And then if you look at that map, the state's actually very purple, right? And so obviously it's still a rural state, an ag state. But, Chase is right. We've seen in the last 10 years, we've made major gains in the urban areas and suburban areas in Kansas as Democrats. But at the same time, every 2 or 3 seats we pick up in Johnson County, we lose 2 or 3 seats. The Kansas House Dems just finished a statewide tour this summer where we went to 14 different cities across the state where we intentionally, 13 of those went to places that we have lost ground in the last 8 years. So places like Newton, where we lost that seat narrowly in 2020, Hutchinson, where we lost that seat last year in 2024, Pittsburgh, where we lost that seat in 2020, and so Dodge City, where we haven't competed in that district since 2016. And so we wanted to go across the state to listen to people because I think that, before I was elected leader, we get elected, we do our job, we go to session, then we all go back to our day-to-day lives. And I think that a vacuum kind of allows for Democrats in those spaces that we don't represent to be defined by, broadcast news or what people are seeing on the internet. And we wanted to just go make them understand that, hey, yes, we're Democrats. Yes, we do believe in some progressive policies, but I think at the end of the day, we still hear you. We still care about you. And frankly, as someone who lives in Johnson County, our ag industry remaining strong and Western Kansas agriculture continuing to prosper is incredibly important for the state. I think Johnson County is about 1/3 of the revenue that comes into the state. We do better when Western Kansas is doing better, right? And so we've got Representative Lindsey Vaughn in the House, who is our ranking on water, who has worked tirelessly with the water chair and the Republicans on that committee to make sure that we are protecting the aquifer. If we don't have access to water out there, how do you have feedlots? How do you have the soybeans and everything that we're producing that we're shipping out all over the country? And so I think specifically about the party, though, we just saw this last November's election, right? You have everyone as progressive as Mandami in New York to Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. Our political twin in Johnson County, Kansas is Fairfax County, Virginia. And so we always get a preview every single year. The demographic makeup, the education, the affluent folks that are in those parts of those districts, we get a predictor of what it's going to look like the following year if everything looks the same. And so we have continued to see those suburban women who are had been long-term. I think my district was a 12-point Romney district, and Kamala Harris won it by about the same margin, right? So that's a 24-point swing. We're seeing people, to Chase's point, right? Like the folks that traditionally have supported Democrats in the past, that felt left out, that felt like Democrats were, rich elites drinking martinis and suits, felt like the Democratic Party who once stood for them aren't the ones that are there to fight for them anymore. I think post-Trump 2.0, we've seen Democrats overperform. I think that is partially opposition to the administration's policies. And I think it's partially Democrats getting back to the root issues of talking about kitchen table issues and talking about the fact that we also are struggling to afford food and rent and gas prices. And so I think at the end of the day, no party has the solution to all these issues. But I think right now, more than anything, people just want to be heard.
Yeah, great responses from both of you. I would love to jump back to Senator Blasi. You mentioned that Trump's administration has had a huge impact on the party across the nation, especially in Kansas. And I would love to hear your thoughts on, what a post-Trump Republican Party, especially in Kansas, would look like.
That obviously remains to be seen. When Trump left office in 2020, his influence on the party was still very strong. I mean, he was a man out of office, out of power, and didn't leave on a high note, as everyone recalls. And so, but his influence was insurmountable. I mean, obviously the governor of Florida, Rick DeSantis, tried to try to run for office, higher office, and he just got pummeled. I mean, Trump's grip is very strong, and voters have a strong loyalty to him and on our side of the aisle. And so when he leaves office, does that mean J.D. Vance becomes the new leader because he is the current vice president, or is there somebody else? I don't know. And I think it's hard to predict, because who in 2016 would have thought Donald Trump would have been the Republican nominee and the president? I mean, certainly most Republicans that I was running around with and running the Tea Party movement during 2010 and 2012 elections would have never predicted a Trump nominee in presidency. Because there was, at the time, just a lot of concern about a guy who just switched parties from lifelong Democrat to Republican, running for office, saying all these things, obviously said things that were, politically at the time, you're like, you don't say those things, and he's known to just say things that make people scratch their heads. So it's just who Trump is. And he has a image that no one else can replicate, even though they try. There's people running for governor today in the state of Kansas who want to be like Trump and replicate his persona and his ways, and they just can't do it. It fails. And so Trump has somehow built a strong brand around who he is. And when he leaves the presidency at the end of 2028, who knows what will happen? It's hard. I think it's hard to be seen.
Yeah, I think for someone who grew up in a Republican house, I interned for my Republican congresswoman in college. We were still, before Trump, at a place where that was okay, right? Like, Representative Lynn Jenkins at the time was a traditional conservative. She took votes while she was in the state legislature that her own party disagreed with, but she was voting per district, right? I long for going back to the days where we could disagree agreeably versus the situation that we're in today, where if there's these litmus tests on both sides of the aisle, if you don't meet X, Y, and Z, then you're not a Democrat or you're not a Republican. I think in the same way, the post-Trump MAGA movement will be interesting. You have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been one of the most vocal supporters of the president, that disagreed with them on one issue and is out and being called, Marjorie Trader Greene, right? I hope that what we can get back to post Donald Trump is a strong Republican Party opposing a strong Democratic Party is better for everyone, and being able to have those party disagreements while still being able to work with the other side of the aisle. I hope we can go back to a place where it was just normal for people to be like, I think, what's the group in Congress called? No Nonsense or whatever. They're a group of bipartisan folks who come together for solutions. I hope we can get back to a day where it's normal for people to work in DC together.
Yeah, those are both great answers. From Minority Leader Woodard, I'd love to hear, you mentioned the tour that House Dems went on this past summer, and how you intentionally went to counties where you had lost seats or have, lost a margin. And I would love, and then you mentioned, more progressive candidates winning throughout the country. So Ron Mamdani, Abigail Spanberger, even, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. I would love to hear about, what Democrats are doing or what you personally are doing to more like win back those votes. Like, you went on the listening tour, or like align their voters in the wake of progressive candidates.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite part of the tour was going to Garden City, and someone, we got to the question and answer period, and someone said, "What the heck are you all doing to actually make sure we have contest seats like this? And what are you going to do to actually earn our votes in Garden City?" I said, "When was the last time we were here? We're literally here to work with you, to empower the work that you're doing, and to find candidates on the ground." We were talking to someone that doing candidate recruitment right now. We're in the thick of it, to talk to people into taking a chance and stepping up and running for office. And someone the other day was like, "Well, this other person, they've been elected to this office before, they've done this, they're involved in this group or this club." And I was like, if I went to your neighbor and asked if those credentials matter, or if you, a football coach who is a foster parent, who is involved in this entrepreneurship group, if I put those profiles next to each other, they're going to pick you, right? And so traveling the state, not only just in these seats that we think are super competitive, but in the places like Western Kansas, where people just haven't had an option, right? It's a Republican primary and then there's no one on the ballot. I think it's just important for us as Democrats to seek out those community-rooted individuals who are trusted by their neighbors. The biggest thing we heard in parts of these places we went to was, "I am a Democrat. I vote Democratic, but I have to register as a Republican because, I own a business, or I do this or do that." Also, part of what I want to get back to, where if your neighbor's a Democrat, they don't have to fear for, your friendship or whether or not you will be a patron at their business. And so I think for us, it's truly just going out, finding people who are rooted in their community, who look and feel to voters like it is just their neighbor. We've all seen that person, the politician on Netflix. I guess I'm like describing my kind of route to politics, but, we don't need a little politician factor. We need people who know what it's like to live in those communities, and that's what we're seeking out. We've built a campaign operation like we've never had before. We are recruiting some of the strongest candidates I've seen in a decade. 2016 was the last time House Democrats flipped seats and picked up seats. We've either held or had to, pick up 5 seats or lose 5. We're really getting to a position where at the end of the day, I can't control whether or not our candidates win. That's up to the people to decide. But I can do every single thing that we can to try to make sure that they feel supported and feel like we got them across the finish line. What Kansas House Dems have been doing hasn't been working. So we threw the playbook out and we're starting from scratch.
Get into my last final couple questions. I would love to hear one of your legislative priorities or goals for this upcoming session. And we can start with Senator Blasi.
Well, when we think of government, I think most people think the government isn't really good at providing a good service. And when the government's not working for the people, the government is failing. And it owes us to be responsible to ensure that the experience that Kansans are getting from their government is positive and good. And so one example is the tag office. I know in my county of Sedgwick and Brandon's county of Johnson, the 2 largest counties in the state, the experience of the tag office is, from my understanding, Johnson County as well, but for sure in Sedgwick County, it's miserable. It's horrible. All day, you're taking off work, you're there all day, your experience is horrible. You might have one missing document, you're sent away. You have to take off one other day off work. And it's just not working for Kansas families. And so our laws are so archaic. I think that my goal next session and future sessions as well, as we look down the road, is modernizing state government. State government has to work better for the people in the 21st century. When we have laws in the book that say you have to register your vehicle at the tag office in your county, you can't go to the county next door where there's no wait, even though it has no practical reason with the state on why you have to do that. It's just a law that says you have to do it because of this geographical boundary. You have to do it in this county. That makes no sense. when it says that you have a personalized plate, you have to go into the county after 5 years just to make sure you're in person to present your documents, makes no sense. We don't have license plates anymore in the physical tag offices. They're all done via mail. You get your tag in the mail. So all these archaic laws are requiring people to take off work, go sit in the tag office all day, which is not an enjoyable experience. And then at the end of the day, it might not even be served or have a pleasant experience based on maybe a missing document or whatever the situation is. And so we have got to figure out how state government can work better for Kansans. And so that is one example of how we're going to modernize our government. In next session, we're going to start that path by repealing some of these obsolete statutes that just make no sense in the 21st century. And so that is what I hope we'll accomplish next year. And I hope in years to come, we can look at all aspects of state government, figure out how we can modernize.
Hey, as someone who votes against license plate bills, sign me up for making it easier for people to actually get their license plates. But I think as we look ahead to the next session, it's always one of those where, like, as Democrats, we've got our agenda, our policy that we want to push for. But knowing the reality of the makeup of the legislature, I think for me, it's really just looking at, for my district specifically, looking at what we can do for renters. There's a lot of conversations about property tax relief, and what that looks like, and how we either have a rolling average for property valuations or things like that. I represent, I think my district's now 64% renter and the most renters in the state. And so people around the county, and Lenexa specifically, have for the last, 10, 20 years seen a lot of growth. Lenexa was very intentional about taking the all angles approach for multifamily housing and single family homes, which broadening that tax base actually allowed Lenexa to once again lower their property tax mill levy and rebate property tax owners. Renters don't see any of that, right? And yet our rent has doubled in the last 10 years, just like people's property valuations are going up as well. And so I think as we look at these affordability issues, looking at what we can also do for renters, I ran an amendment on a bill a couple of years ago. I was actually shocked by how many Republicans voted with us. And then once I actually got the list from research of who represents renters, like from the most to the least, those folks that voted with us actually overlap. So I think that was a good lesson for me of, those are the kind of folks to talk to when we're looking at these sort of property tax bills, to say, hey, yes, this is a really great part of the population. What are we also doing for these people who are also paying property taxes? It's just baked into their rent. Because I don't know about all of the state, but, my 1-bedroom apartment is $1,700 a month, which is a lot. And yet I still can't afford a mortgage in my district. And so how do we do something that gets it to where renters can save up so that we can get them into the home ownership pipeline?
Those are both great priorities to hear. I am someone who does not like going to the tag office to renew my tags, or really any experience like with the DMV, like getting a new license, any of that. So I'm super excited for some hopeful modernization. I'm also in college and a renter, so would love to see some relief there, because rent is expensive, and especially when you're working minimum wage or close to minimum wage jobs, it's a lot. So yeah, thank you both for that. Wrapping up, I have one last question for both of you. What is and it can be short or long or whatever, what's a small piece of advice you would give to young people thinking about running for office or wanting to get more involved in public service or in Kansas politics?
Yeah, I think the pet peeve I always had when I was in student leadership and I would go over to Topeka was people saying, "You're the next generation." I'm like, no, Billy Bob, I'm actually a student body vice president overseeing a $24 million budget with 10 full-time staff members. I'm not just here saying, don't cut higher education funding. It was like actually overseeing services that students relied on. And yet we were also the only administration that lowered student campus fees and at the same time maintained campus services. So I was like, and now I'm a Democrat. So no. Some levity there. But I would say that don't let people say that you're the next generation. You have a voice now. You have the ability to, if you can't run for office yet, you can help people that are. You can adopt a school board candidate, city council folks, a candidate for the legislature. I think people get so excited about presidential races, and it's a really great way to get involved. But if you're helping someone run for school board or running for the state senate or the state house, you're not only helping with them with comms and field and strategy and paid media, you're getting access to everything. And so if you're considering running for office, go help someone that's doing it right now so you get a front row seat to see what it looks like. And at the end of the day, there's so many races that are in those down ballot seats that are decided by a handful of votes, that your volunteerism, your ability to work with them and to knock doors or call voters could be the difference of the outcome of the election. And so don't sit on the sidelines. Don't wait for someone to tell you it's your turn. It's your turn right now.
Piggyback on that, I would just say relationships is what I always try to tell young folks, is relationships matter in every aspect. If you want to get involved in a campaign, how do you get involved if you don't have a relationship with a candidate? So go meet that candidate. Ask how you get involved. But if you want to run for office yourself, build relationships. It drives me crazy when folks run for office and they don't know 10 of their neighbors. It's like, if you don't even know who lives in the community you want to represent, how are you going to represent them well? And so go meet the local, if you're running for school board, go meet go talk to teachers in that school district, go meet the administrators, go meet parents. Maybe you're a parent, but you need to be involved and you need to have relationships, because they might have a different perspective and they can inform you to be a better representative or member of public service. So I tell young people all the time, whether it's in your career or running for office, relationships matter. You don't have to know everything. Someone out there knows more than you, but if you have a relationship with them, they can help you. And so just go build relationships. Go ask people for help, because there are so many people who have walked this path before you that are well beyond, a lot older than you, that have so much life experience and who have learned hard lessons, and they can teach you how to avoid learning some of those hard lessons yourself. And so just having those relationships matter. And so we'll talk to someone who's walked the walk and just learn. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And sometimes young people want to go change the world and we're going to go out there and we're going to do all these things. Sometimes just sitting and listening to folks who've walked this path is also very important. So building relationships is very key, is what I would give to advise young people.
Yeah, well, thank you both for those pieces of advice. I know our listeners and especially members of our student advisory board who are very motivated young individuals will really appreciate that. So that is all the time we have today. Thank you both for joining me as guests in the first couple episodes of our rollout. Yeah, same goes for our listeners. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I will see you next time from the balcony.